Yeah, you're gonna like that book, Pete. It's good for anybody. That's the well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people, 10 people in this room, and a couple of people online. So that's a good group. And we've got Kristine Meldrum with us here. And I've talked to almost everybody about this, either Aaron or I have talked about it. So Aaron is our American Connection Corps member who's working with us this year full time. We're so glad to have her, and I think we've got her back next year. So Aaron's taken down hey Rich, Aaron's taken down the questions, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end, so we won't interrupt what Kristine is having to say. This book is life-changing for anybody. When we were in Austin for a conference, I was there to speak on passing legislation in your state for a Parkinson's disease registry. And I'm happy to say we've made it through the Senate in Kentucky. So we have the House of Representatives next. But when I ordered the book and I got home and I read it, and I got to page 34, and I read the part that said that people with Parkinson's need to be working at this high intensity that Kristine will talk about, and that anything you do is helpful, but if you don't get to a certain intensity on a certain amount of time through the week, it will not help your Parkinson's symptoms. I read that, I read it again, and then I read it to my husband, and I said, this is it. This is why the people in our community that exercise all the time are not having great success with it, because they're not getting to the intensity. They don't know it. And we've got to get the word out about this. So the first thing we decided to do was have a book study, and Kristine was just immediately so gracious to say she would join us all 3 weeks. And she has, I've talked with her just a little bit today and several other times, but she's kind of working through remote areas too. We have some challenges here finding the people that can teach the classes and all of that, but we will get it done. We will get it done. Kristine, thanks so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you guys today. I have been working with people with Parkinson's for over a decade, and I'm a exercise professional. I have over 10 different certifications and NCCA certifications, as well as Parkinson's certifications. And my journey started with bringing scientific research into my classrooms. And so what I did was I started with cycling, and I was bringing Dr. Jay Alberts' research with cycling, and what has to occur for people to reduce their symptoms through cycling. And I've started having phenomenal results with my cycling Parkinson's students. And what happened is that with Jay, I sent him an email, and I wanted him to know that his research was working phenomenally in the community. And so he wrote back to me, and he was just like, he was thrilled, because what he said was that, as a research scientist, they do all this research, but their research papers go basically back to the bookshelf and gather dust. And so for them to hear that it is actually working in the community was remarkable to him. And that kind of started a long relationship between us. And so I started, my corporate background was in corporate communications, marketing, and in English. And so I started writing a bunch of articles on the science behind Parkinson's exercise. Because what I found was that when I was working with my students, when I started to explain to them in a, simple way what was happening in their brains when they were exercising to help them get results through exercise, they were like, oh my gosh, I understand this now. And then they wanted to exercise more. And so that's kind of what got me uh, into this whole Parkinson's exercise world. And for about 6 years, Jay and I kept talking about, somebody needs to write a book about this. And we kind of kept,
Did you say it's not going to be me?
well, we were like, yep, somebody needs to write a book. And we kind of were waiting and waiting for someone to do it. And one day I was watching, I kept hearing and watching all this wrong information keep being spouted on all these Zoom presentations, and oh, it would just drive me crazy. And I'm like, everybody's being told all these things, but they're not the right things to help them. And so I finally said to Jay, I said, I'm going to do it. I said, we're going to do it. And he said, okay. He didn't believe me until I started sending him drafts. He said, okay, we're doing this. So that's what happened. And then we brought, I called Dr. Bloom and interviewed him. And he is Dr. Vashna Bloom. He is the world expert on Parkinson's. And I'll tell you a funny story. He said to me, he said, well, why are you doing it with Jay? Why didn't you do it with me?
Of course he did.
Right? I said, well, I said, maybe the next one. And he laughed, and then I said, but would you like to write the foreword to the book? And he said, absolutely.
That's
He
great.
said, this is so needed. People need to understand this. And so that's where I got Dr. Bloom in on it. And then another funny story is Dr. Corcus, who he is currently running the $20 million Sparks treadmill studies, which was one of the cornerstones for Parkinson's exercise. And he was funny too. I called him and asked him about, because I knew these are the giants of Parkinson's exercise. These three men are what brought Parkinson's exercise to what it is today. And I knew these three men needed to be the cornerstone of the book. And he was funny. He was just like, well, you have Jay and you have Boz. Why do you need me? Oh my goodness. So it turned into a wonderful experience, and the three of us have a great time going around and talking to people when we do book events, and it's been quite an experience. So
Can I get you to tell us the story, the Iowa bike ride story? If they've already read it, they'll enjoy hearing it again. But a lot of these people haven't read the book, and
okay,
it's an
yes.
unbelievable
So
story.
so the story starts, and it's ironic because I live in Iowa.
Yes. I had a hard time getting past that.
I know. So it's all ironic in that. And I live in Iowa, and Jay has been coming to Iowa for years and Jay is from Iowa originally. And so he would bring groups of people with Parkinson's here to do the yearly ride across Iowa, which is about, oh gosh, I want to say it's 600 or 800 miles across Iowa. And he would always bring a group of people with him to ride across Iowa, a group of Parkinson's. And he was a young research scientist at the time. It was back in 2003. And so he had a group. This is a funny story. He had he had a wife and a husband that were, as he says, they were debating the best ways to get across Iowa, i.e., they were having a bit of a fight on how to get across Iowa the best possible way. And so Jay said, well, how about Kathy, how about you ride with me? And Kathy was the woman, she had Parkinson's. And so as they were riding across Iowa, every single day, she would say to him, I don't feel like I have Parkinson's. I feel great. I don't know what's happening to me, but I just feel fantastic. And he started to notice that her symptoms were getting better every day. And so he just was like, wow. And one day he noticed they were writing cards to send back to people on the trip across. And he said, who wrote this card? And she said, I did. Isn't it great? Because her handwriting was so big. And she had been writing really small hand with the micro aphasia. And so her handwriting was really small. And now it was huge. And she was like, look at that. And so he thought, okay, there's something going on here, and it's not the homemade pies that we keep getting at every town we stop in. And so he went back to the Cleveland Clinic, and that's where he started doing the first research on exercise for Parkinson's.
That's incredible.
It is incredible.
And I know you'll get to this at some point, and I want you to tell the story and the timeline.
Oh, it's fine.
You want to tell it, but I was listening to a podcast or something this morning with you on it, and I've listened to a bunch of them. You do a great job. But this particular one, you were talking about people getting out of wheelchairs and being able to, I mean, I think when you have Parkinson's and you find out about exercise, you think, well, if I can just slow progression or maintain, but actually, I mean, I've seen it myself. I'm better now than I was even 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something I expected.
Exactly. So I think that what I tell people is that when you find out what is possible through exercise, it's absolutely amazing. And that is what people, when they read the book and they read there's 20 incredible stories of people in all different parts of their Parkinson's journey. And they're doing different things with their exercise for different reasons. If you want, if so, for instance, one person wanted to keep her medications low, like from the beginning of the time that she was diagnosed. She didn't want to. She didn't want to have the side effects of getting too high with her medications. She knew, because she came from a family with doctors, that if her medications got high, the side effects were actually worse than the actual disease itself. And she knew she didn't want to end up in that spot. So she worked with her doctor, and she kept her medications low through exercise for the past 8 years. She has kept her medications almost to the same. I think she's only ever gone up maybe one time. So she's on the same very, very low prescription that she started with. But that was her goal through exercise. Other people want to use exercise, obviously, to slow progression of disease. I had a woman that used exercise to stay out of with a stroke, she didn't want to end up in a wheelchair. So there's all kinds of things and reasons that people are using the exercise, and their goals are different. And that's what we do. We sit down and we'll get to the cocktail later, but when figuring out that cocktail plan, the first thing I ask people is, what are your symptoms? What do you want to achieve? What goal do you have through your exercise? Do you want to what do we want to get to? And that's really an important thing in building that cocktail later on, and we'll talk about that.
So this story happened with Jay Alberts, and at what point did you get involved?
So I had been working probably well, I want to say, so I was probably back. So it's been 10 years and he's been doing 20. We probably met in the middle. So it's been 20, he's been doing it for 20 years and I met him at the 10-year mark, probably.
And you were already in exercise.
Yes, yes. So for me, so people always ask me, how did I get involved in Parkinson's? Because I don't have, I have no one in my family or anyone related to me with Parkinson's.
Me, I don't either. I do have Parkinson's.
So I don't have Parkinson's and I have no one in my family with Parkinson's. So that's the question I get all the time. Why are you so invested in people helping people with Parkinson's? So I tell people that I was teaching cycling, just cycling and exercise was my my profession after I quote unquote retired from my other profession. And one day I went into a class and the person that taught the Parkinson cycling class was right after mine. And so I would stay after and help him with his Parkinson's students. I would help them get into their bikes because he had like 30 people in his class, and that's a lot of people to help get into their bikes by himself. And I would just talk to everybody in the class. And I just thought, oh my gosh, these are the bravest people I have ever met in my entire life. And it was just overwhelming to me. And mostly because my mother had strokes when she was probably in her 60s, late 60s, early 70s. So my mother had strokes and she ended up going blind. And when she had strokes, she did the opposite of what I saw these people with Parkinson's doing. They were out fighting their disease. She went into a room and she never came out until the day she died. So for me, I thought, this is the kind of people that I want to help. I want to help people that are um, fighting their disease, facing their disease with courage. And so when the person that was teaching that class had to leave and they were going to shut the program down. And so I wasn't going to let that happen. So
Wow.
that's when I stepped in and I changed the course of my study. And that's how I got in and went.
Well, I was diagnosed in 2016, and
Uh-huh.
I read some article that said, they say cycling can be good for you. And I've seen things change. The information about Parkinson's is changing so much because now we really do know that it absolutely works. And I guess the history of Parkinson's exercise.
Mm.
That one really interested me because I didn't realize it had been that long that it went without any encouragement, and even recommending people do forms of morphine and cannabis just to chill out on the couch.
Yes. Isn't that amazing
Yeah,
that so for close to 200 years that is like one of the most chilling things that when I did the research on that, that absolutely chilled me to the bones. That if we had those two scientists, one went one direction and one went the opposite direction, and to think if we had gone the one way with going through exercise, we would have had 200 years where people wouldn't have been sent to sit home on a couch,
hmm,
and a lot of people would have um, not basically been sent home, to die. And it is just, Dr. Oken, that just absolutely made him sick. He did not know that, and he said that he could not believe that that was the case when he read that.
yeah. So Parkinson's was basically was discovered by Dr. Parkinson's in 1817, the men getting off the train in London, England. And from there, what did they do with those men
With
originally?
originally, well, you know, it's interesting because you had you had Dr. Parkinson's, but the real research and stuff was Charcot, and then let me get my little timeline. The real Charcot and my timeline here. It's interesting that they give all the credit to Parkinson's, but it was Charcot, and he was the one that was really doing a lot of the. They were doing all the actual studies in their with their big universities and and Gowers. They were the ones that were doing all the big studies and stuff. So it's kind of interesting how and it was Charcot that named Parkinson's.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
After Dr. Parkinson?
Yes, yes, yes. He didn't like them calling it shaky palsy and all of that stuff. So he was the one that renamed it. Yeah, after Parkinson's.
So
Yeah, it's really a very, very interesting. But yeah, the whole thing with Dr. Gowers, you know, and everybody following Dr. Gowers, sending him home and giving, and isn't that interesting, giving him cannabis and all of these things that so that they would sit and not move, which was the absolute worst thing that they could do to a person with Parkinson's. So yeah, it is an interesting, and then it was almost 200 years until J. Albert's ride in Iowa.
So the dark ages for Parkinson's lasted about 200 years, huh?
Yeah.
And then the bike ride happened, and then that kicked off Sparks, right?
So no, that kicked off first. So you had Jay's ride in 2003. You had the early 2000 animal research in about 2000. So there were some animal studies that happened, but it was really the first 2003 bike ride that happened. Then you had Jay's other studies from 2007 to 2009. Sparks happened in 2000, from 2012 to 2015. And so what we had, so from Jay's first cycle of studies, here's what the big kicker was. He found that if you rode on a bike and for high intensity at 80 revolutions per minute on the bike, that your rigidity, tremor, bradykinesia, gait, and your postural stability would improve by 35%. 35%. And the biggest clincher is that what he found is that the people that rode at their own pace, their Parkinson's symptoms improved 0. And that's the thing that study showed. All right. So everybody that in the study, their heart, their lungs, let's see, what do I want to say? Their heart, the normal things cardiovascularly, they improved. But when it comes to your Parkinson's symptoms, unless you're working at a certain cadence number when you're biking, and I'll talk about the heart rate in a second, unless these things are, you're working at these right variables, your Parkinson's symptoms will not improve. And that is why when people throw out there that, oh, just go walk around the block, oh, just go, you know, walk your dog, ride your bike at whatever pace you want, that is not good advice. And that gets into also the whole thing between exercise and physical activity. They are two different things. Physical activity is gardening, walking your dog, or just anything where you're moving and producing energy. Physical activity is you have a goal, you're going to expend energy to achieve a specific exercise goal. You are biking, you are running, um, you're on the elliptical with a specific goal in mind. That is exercise. And so, and that's one of the reasons when I kept hearing these things like, oh, yes, it's fine. You can just go do this or go do that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're telling these people that this is going to help their Parkinson's symptoms. But the problem with that is just like anything else, when people go and exercise and nothing helps them, then they're going to stop exercising and saying, well, that didn't help me. So why should I keep doing this? And that's the part that was really driving me crazy. Okay, so we have Dr. Alberts. He did the whole first bike studies. Then we had Dr. Corcus come up with the treadmill study. So his treadmill studies were pretty landmark because what he did was he set out to find that people with Parkinson's who were 50 to 80 years old, that it was safe for them to exercise at high intensity levels. That's number one, they wanted to make sure that yes, it's safe for us to exercise at a higher intensity. And two, that if if they did this, that it would slow progression of the disease and help the symptoms. Now, the main thing is they looked at they had a high intensity, they had moderate intensity, and they had the usual, what they call usual care, which means whatever you normally do every day, which for most of them meant not exercising. So what happened is that the people that were that did the usual care for 6 months, they were on the treadmill three to four times a week. Then that group, I'm trying to remember my numbers. Okay, usual care group, 6 months. The disease progressed. They're on the UPDRS, the Parkinson scale of motor symptoms. The scale goes from 0 to 4. 0 means you're good. Your symptoms are not, they're not progressing or getting worse. 4 means that's the worst on the scale. All right. So the usual group in 6 months moved to 3.3. The moderate group that was working at 65% of maximum heart rate, that was their measurements. So that group went to 2.0 on the UPDRS scale. But the high intensity group that was working at 80 to 85% of maximum heart rate was 0.3, 0.3 in 6 months. That means they did not progress. Their symptoms didn't progress. Their motor symptoms were great. So that became the eureka moment. Eureka, if we work out at these intensity levels, okay, we can slow progression of disease. And that's why right now the Sparks-3, and I talk about this in the book, all the things now there's, I think there are 20 different sites across the country and Canada. They're reevaluating again just to clarify, and they're actually finding more and more and more things about what exercise can do for people with Parkinson's. And it's going to be, I mean, it's going to be phenomenal what they're going to come back with for this research study going on right now. But we do know that, yes, from the Sparks-2 study. So that became the next piece of information. All right, we know that. So then you have Dr. Bloom's study in the Netherlands. And it was a study that came out of the hospital and into the homes. All right. He gave them bikes. He gave them little computers on their screens. And that was all phenomenal. Same thing. They worked at 80 to 85% of maximum heart rate. And they found out several things that are really, really important. Again, all the same things we confirmed. 80, riding on a bike at 80 RPM, 80% of maximum heart rate. But here's the really phenomenal thing that kind of gets lost sometimes about Dr. Bloom's study, but shouldn't. The thing that he found is that the cycling group, the brain stopped shrinking. And it's like, the brain stopped shrinking. Do you know what that means? That means no cognitive decline.
Yeah.
No cognitive decline. Well, the other group was a stretching group. Their brains kept shrinking. But the cycling group, the brains did not shrink. Also, here was the best part. Here's where Dr. Bloom starts like getting all giddy when he talks about it. The cycling group, the parts of the brain that was damaged by PD in the basal ganglia made new brain connections in the healthy brain cortex. And that is where you plan all your movements.
Yeah.
And that, he's like, everyone should be cycling when you hear, or yeah, cycling or moving or doing the aerobic part when you hear that, because that is phenomenal that can occur. So that is what is important about all of their research. And it's explained really well in the book.
Right, right.
But I mean, and so the other part is I always like, and I have a really great slide that explains what happens, what's going on in your brain when you exercise. So whether you're, and the other thing is I can't really get into we're not at the cocktail yet, but we will. So
They
when we
have a
talk,
nice picture of the cocktail.
oh, okay. So if you look at the cocktail and you see the orange layer, the very first layer is the most, I say it's the most important, but I mean, they're all important, but to make all these things happen that I'm just now talking about in your brain, it's the number one layer. Aerobic exercise has to occur 3 times a week. All right. 3 times a week, that orange layer. And it has to be aerobic. It has to be biking, treadmill, has to be swimming, elliptical. I'm trying to think of other things that are, that's aerobic, all right? And you have to understand the difference between, it's where you're for 30 minutes, you have your heart rate up, all right? And at those levels that I'm talking about. I'm going to give you it's not as hard as you think, secret in a moment. But what happens? So what's happening in your brain while you're doing those things that makes it easier, or what occurs that makes it that to make these changes happen in your body? So you're working out. You're on the bike. You're on the treadmill. You're doing your aerobic exercise, and so what happens is that your muscles are contracting. I usually have this little muscle that starts moving, and it releases this hormone, and it's called irisin. And this hormone is actually called the exercise hormone. How about that? And the hormone does 2 things. It stimulates well, first of all, it improves your cognitive function. That's the first thing it does. And that is really great because it helps you learn and relearn things. It's part of the neuroplasticity stuff component in the brain. And it also stimulates what's called BDNF, and that's brain-derived neurotrophic factor. That is the part that protects and preserves neurons in your brain, right? The Parkinson's is trying to eat the neurons. Well, this BDNF, this wonderful BDNF that is expressed because you're exercising aerobically, is it is produced through your exercising through this irisin. And so that is what it's helping preserve those neurons, and it is helping to reverse that damage and prevent it from losing any more. So that is why exercise is so, so important. And that's why the right kind of exercise done at the right intensity is so important, because that's what helps the symptom change occur.
Right. Well,
So,
when
yeah, go ahead.
when I was first, I walk in the park in the summer,
Uh-huh.
and I do a pretty brisk walk. But this
Mhm.
year, I noticed more than ever that when the weather cooled off and I got back on my bike inside the house, and I'm much more aware of making sure those reps are up there and all,
Yeah,
I started getting better.
yeah.
And then I read your book, and it made sense. It made perfect sense. So it's nice to be able, that's a great thing about the bike or a treadmill. Although,
Mhm.
I mean, if you're doing that 3 days a week, you got plenty of time to walk outside, right?
Right. You can do that with your number 5, what I love to
Right,
do, right?
right.
You
Yeah,
can
but
always,
so many people do number 5. That's their number 1.
well, that's the problem.
Yes. They say I had my walk today, and
Right. But, and that's because they don't understand.
right,
They don't understand because everybody's telling them it's okay, just go for a walk.
right,
Well, that's okay for your heart. It's okay for your, cardiovascular. But it's not if you don't want to, it's not okay if you want your symptoms for Parkinson's to be better.
right.
That's the difference. And I
Well,
think if you have Parkinson's, you want your symptoms for your Parkinson's to be better.
right. So everybody in this room, well, not just the people with Parkinson's, but everybody will benefit from this
Well,
form of
yes,
exercise.
yes, because even if you don't have Parkinson's, it all of these things help. It's like white matter in our brain. It
Mhm.
helps, which make all our connections and our ability um, to understand and make connections and think faster. Those things happen too when we do all of these kinds of activities. So it's good for everybody, not just for and we all want our brains not to shrink, because
Right,
here's the thing about brain shrinkage. Brain shrinkage happens to everyone, and if your brain shrinks too much, you start to have cognitive decline. If it shrinks even further, you have dementia. If it shrinks even further, you have Alzheimer's. So
yeah.
it's all relative.
Well, I was in a symposium this weekend, and some of the doctors from the University of Kentucky were there talking about trials. And I asked them, what did being fitness have to do with clinical trials? And they said, well, when we see somebody who's had Parkinson's for a while, and they're fit and they're exercising every day or most of the time, then we see a person who is going to be a good candidate for research. And
Mm,
I thought that I had never really thought about that aspect of it. But there's every reason to stay in shape.
yeah.
Feel good.
Yes. Yes. That's true. So I was going to mention real quick the positive effects of exercise for you from on your brain. Just that when um, when you when you exercise, so insulin causes tremor, rigidity, and bradykinesia. All right, but when you exercise, the it reduces your inflammation. So that's one of the things. And inflammation, when you reduce that inflammation, that is what's helping contribute to also to slowing that progression. And because chronic inflammation is what is helping progress that the disease. The other thing is that there's a lot of and I have really great slides on this. If you go on my website, I have a lot of some of my talks where I have my slides, and it helps to see the graphics that go with this. But the it helps with your mood, your sleep, your depression, all the other non-motor things as well. Exercise does that as well. And there's just so many things that come that people don't even realize that exercise helps with. Not to mention all the things I've just mentioned along with this.
Right. Well, in just a few minutes, we're going to take some questions, but before we do, and I know you'll be getting into more stories later, but in one of our later sessions, but say you have a person come in a wheelchair or someone who's barely getting around. What do you do? I mean, what's step one?
Well, so step one for anyone is they should go through physical therapy first and have gone through a physical therapist should have cleared them for exercise.
Right.
This is number one. All right. So if a physical therapist has cleared a person and then they can come in and it's this is one of those questions that's kind of difficult because it's so dependent on the person.
Yeah.
A lot of it depends on a person's determination, their how how gung-ho they are in a way. So if I have someone who comes in and they're like in a wheelchair, like I'll take Sandy for you for an example. Sandy's my she's my stroke person. All right. Sandy came in and she's paralyzed on one half of her body. One half of her body. Now Sandy came in and said, I want to ride a bike. I'm paralyzed on one half of my body, but I want you to get me up on a bike. All right. So Sandy was determined. And I said, okay, we'll get you up on a bike. It took us a few times to get Sandy up on a bike, but we got her up on a bike. And there's pictures of her in the book. You'll see Sandy on a bike. And Sandy learned to ride a bike, not a recumbent bike, a stationary bike. And Sandy, she rode first, 50 RPM, and she worked her way. She worked her way over 6 months to she could ride 80 RPM, paralyzed half of her body. Now that's sheer will and determination for you. In 2 years, her goal was to be able to build enough leg strength to stand up. And she did it.
Oh, wow.
And we took a photo and everyone in the room cheered her on, and she was like, you would think she had climbed Mount Everest but that was her Mount Everest, was to be able to do
Awesome.
that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let me ask you have you dealt with much young onset?
I'm actually working with some young onset right now. What do you want? What do you want to know?
Well, I'm curious. I have a friend that is a young onset, and she's had a little, she's in Eastern Kentucky, and she's had trouble finding a Parkinson's group, finding Parkinson's exercise, and all that kind of thing. So we've shared the book with her, and hopefully she'll get down this way, and we'll get her through our physical therapist and then work in that direction. But
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious about that. Um, Before we take questions, do you have anything else you want to throw in for our first session?
Yes, I do want to say this. I want to clarify. Now, everybody, when they hear me say, "Oh, you got to work high intensity," "Oh, you got to," this is, they all look at me like I'm absolutely crazy, that it's so hard, that, I'll never be able to do this. But my message is always, yes, you can. And here is why. It's actually harder for someone in shape to hit 80% of maximum heart rate than someone who is not, who hasn't been working out and who is not in shape. And everybody always laughs and they go, really? And here's why. When you haven't been working out and you're just getting back into working out, you know how you start even just like even walking briskly and you're breathless really fast? That's 80% maximum heart rate. When
Yeah,
you start feeling that, oh my gosh, you're just kind of breathless and you've barely done anything, that's 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 it. You're there. All right.
right.
And so that's why people are like, oh my gosh, I'll never be able to get there, but you can get there really fast actually. And so you have to work your way up gradually. I tell people you start with maybe 10 minutes and you're going to have to work and build a little base, cardio base, and that takes like 6 weeks. And so it's a real gradual process and it's not, just boom, it's not, you're not going to just be there doing, jumping jacks for an hour. Like people seem to think that's what they're going to be doing. It's a very slow process. And everybody is going to find, the thing is, you have to find what you love or like, and you have to try different things. When people come in to me to do a cocktail an assessment, I usually, after we've done all the assessments and all the different things, I usually have them try a bunch of different things and a lot of things they don't might think they might not like. And then they find they like things they didn't think they like. So that's always another thing is keep an open mind. And these are you want to try the things that are going to help you the most. That's always a good thing.
Well, 3 days a week, 30 minutes at a high maximum. Isn't that what you
It
recommend?
is. And I always
That's a- not
I do
much.
it in intervals, you
Yeah.
know,
When
you
you
work
say
your way up.
intervals, what do you mean in intervals?
So in the new book in the new book I have is I've got a bunch of workouts that show exactly how to get there for biking, for treadmill, how somebody does a base building and how to do everything. And so if somebody was just starting, I would have them start at 30 to 60% of maximum heart rate.
Mm,
And they would start maybe 10 minutes at that. And they would start maybe a minute at that 30 to 60% and then drop down and then go back. So if we decided they could handle 50% of maximum heart rate, they would go to the 50% and then maybe come down for 30 seconds and then go to that heart rate and then down for 30 seconds, so you're kind of
right.
working your way and
Yeah.
then for a week. And then the next week, you go a little higher, maybe a little longer. So it's gradual. That's what I mean. It's not like you just throw you into the fire pan, the frying pan. You kind
Right.
of work your way there.
Well, and those intervals really, really help the time go by.
Oh, they do. They really
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
So, does anybody have any questions?
This is Mike. How are you?
Hi.
Good.
I just add on to what you just finished talking about. I think what I'm dealing with is I used to work out a lot, and I'm coming off of 11 weeks of hernia surgery.
Oh,
So
yes.
when you have hernia, everything gets shut down, and you have to do different exercises. So I used to do probably 11 to 12 hours a week of working out. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So now my whole situation is starting from zero and going back. And the advice that I tell myself is to make failure my best friend
Yep.
and realize that every day is going to be a little better than the day before. And that's how you
Yep.
have to treat this. And if I use a Peloton bike, so I'm using the bike to measure the RPMs and everything else that I can use on the data to show that my workouts are getting better in terms of the speed and the endurance, where I could barely do 10 minutes before. I used to do 450 miles a month. Now I'm doing maybe 60 miles every 2 weeks, and I'll work up to a higher number, but you can't do it overnight. It's probably going to take 3 months, and you have to look at it that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But
Yep.
I think if I make failure my best friend, which I've done, it's a good motivator every day for the next day to be better.
But I wouldn't call it failure. I really wouldn't. I would call it, you're working your way back.
Yep.
You're working your way back. And, everybody at some point is going to experience some, I call it hiccups. Everybody's going to run into a hiccup of it. And that hiccup is called life.
Oh, yeah.
Life is going to come and it's going to, it's going to get in the way at some point. But that's okay because we can all work our way back.
Yep.
And that's what we have to do. But the fact that you are going to do it and that you can do it is what is important.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else have a question?
Hi, this is Karen Malkin.
Just a second. Robert, hold on to your question. Let's see what Karen has to say. No, I'll get you in just a second. Go ahead, Karen.
I just wanted to know if your new book is out yet.
No, actually, I'm still currently writing it, but it's I'm hoping. Hopefully, I was hoping to do it before April, but I think it's going to be more like June timeframe.
Okay, so then based on that, in terms of like your PD specific or your strength or your flexibility and balance, do you recommend 30 minutes of each of those activities 3 times a week also?
No, we'll talk about we'll talk more about the PD cocktail, but it's so the when it comes to the it's kind of like if you can the way I build the cocktail is I go I look back at the Parkinson's recommendations from the Parkinson's foundations. We fold those in as well, kind of what they do, what they recommend. But number one I recommend is the 3 times a week for the aerobics. Then comes strength training, which is a whole nother discussion. And then I fold in on top the flexibility, strength, and all the other things on top. It gets a little tough, and it really just depends on how much time an individual has as to how much we can fold into the cocktail. So it's an individual, it would just really depend on how much time. Some people can, some people have 5 days a week, some people have 2 or 3 only. So it just kind of depends on the time factor.
Okay.
I'm
We've got another question in the audience. Robert, you tell me your question and then I'll. Well, I think the point of the book is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kristine, you're right. You can do all those other things and you're going to feel a little bit better. But if you really want to affect your Parkinson's symptoms, you have to get the number 5. The number 1 has to be. Okay. Okay. Sure. Sure. Right. But we have to get to the high intensity to affect our Parkinson's symptoms, right, Kristine?
yes.
Yeah. No, I do understand what you're saying. And you're saying sometimes that's all people are ready to do.
But let me just make one point about the stretching and the number. So the number 4, why number 4 is important too. If you have rigidity and stiffness, all right, that is going to, if we're not working on that as well, that's going to affect your ability to do number 1, 2, and 3. And this is why the whole thing all works together.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. Anybody else have a question? Pete, what's your question? I'll repeat the question to you, Kristine, after he.
Okay.
Interval training, what?
Yeah, I actually have some circuit workouts in the new book. But what's the question on the interval training?
Hang on, go ahead, Pete. Okay, he's asking about the intervals and how long, whether he mentioned the possibility of doing 10 minutes at a time or like 3 minutes to 3 minutes, or I always did 1-to-1 until.
Yeah, so what I do in the new book is I try to over time extend to build your endurance. So as the weeks progress, I try to build your time. So maybe you start with shorter ones, but like by week 4, you're doing 2-minute ones and 3-minute ones and 4-minute ones. And so you're getting longer as your aerobic base is built.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, that answered his question. I started out 1-to-1 and then I started doing 3-to-1 and tried to keep it up more, but then you
Yeah.
get your heart rate past your maximum heart rate. So, it's all good. Any more? Juanita? Right. Does it make a difference? Her question, Kristine, is, does it make a difference whether you're on, say, an upright bicycle as opposed to a recumbent?
No, you could be on a recumbent.
You get that heart rate up. It doesn't really
Yeah.
matter what you're on,
That's all that
right?
matters. And you
Yeah.
can do it you can do it, you can get your heart rate on a recumbent bike too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you.
And you're cycling your speed as well with the cadence.
Yeah. And you can watch the RPMs on that, on either one of them, I think, and then your heart rate, you start going back and forth on that and your heart rate starts climbing and climbing. It's exciting. Anything else? Anybody else have any more questions? Erin, are there any online questions? Okay, you're welcome to ask questions. Here, you come up here and say it to this because your question is going to be very thorough. This is, okay.
In the book, in chapter 2, there was a description from Ayurvedic medicine from India, and I was wondering if that Ayurvedic medicine has any recommendations for people with neurological disorders.
Oh, that is a good question. That would be something I would have to look up, actually. Not specifically that I know of.
What's your next question?
Some of these I can skip because is the Exergaming available here in the US, that program they used in the Netherlands?
Yeah, they did use Exergaming. I don't think that we have, I mean, I'm sure that there are many programs that people can upload. I would think more so on a not your on your iPad more than anything. But I don't know of I mean, like a Peloton doesn't have any exergaming. I don't know of a cycle program that has exergamings per se here in the US, but I'm sure something like in the iPad world, they could do something like that.
Is that what we have at our place?
We have virtual reality.
The VR, we have a virtual
Oh,
reality
you have something with a VR game?
with, that holds, what's that thing called? A catwalk? Have you seen those?
Oh, no, I
And
have not.
you're strapped in. It even has a seat in it if you need it, and you can't fall.
Is that in the physical therapy? In physical
Oh,
therapy?
that's ours.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I want to see that.
I'm still not sure how to use it, but yeah.
Oh, we
Well,
don't have
yeah.
anything that cool.
You have to get over the motion sickness part. This came from the hollers of Eastern Kentucky.
Oh,
I
wow.
mean, it came from China, but the person who recommended it, it's an interesting story. Aaron, do you have another question?
How can you replicate this style of exercise in the comfort of your own home when the weather is not suitable to go to a specific fitness center to do these things?
Oh, so do you have any specific modality that you're,
I was just thinking, like, for Parkinson's in Motion, like, how can we put something on our Facebook to encourage people that can't reach us? For distance reasons, like, what could we suggest online for them?
online? So do you guys do any online classes at all, or do you do any?
We aren't right now, but
You aren't right now.
Having a stationary bike is not possible for everybody, but that's to me one of the best options.
It is. So, well, we'll have to think about that. Yeah, I'll have to help you think about that. Oh
Okay.
yeah, so somebody's got the Parkinson's. There's lots of, so in chapter 5, I do list a bunch of different resources that are online that are classes that people can go to. And there's a lot of some are free, some are not, and I'm
Yeah.
not sure, that
Yeah.
people can do. So
Yeah.
that would be,
That sure is an option.
that's
Um,
always an option to do
yeah.
classes. I know David and Jackie do their, they still have their class for the Total Parkinson's class,
Mhm.
which is a good one. And the
Power for Parkinson's,
Power for Parkinson's
those
is,
are free, aren't they? And I think, but Parkinson's Wellness Recovery are not free. And
yes,
Rogue Physical Therapy, she's great, but they're not free either.
yeah. So it's
Jane,
just,
did you have a question? Yeah.
yeah, the only thing that I do want people to realize is that all those kinds of classes like that are what we call sports activities versus science proven exercise.
Yeah.
So they kind of,
No, she didn't hear your question, Robert. She was talking about the cycling. They were just saying that people have the Wii gaming.
oh yeah, Wii
So,
gaming is great. I mean, that's good
yeah,
exercise.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've come to the end of a little over our hour. Kristine, we really appreciate you and your time. And for next week, I'm going to recommend that, I think we're going to look at chapters 4 through 7. I had written down what was in chapters 4 through 7, but I don't see it right at my fingertips. So
Oh, well, the
figured I would-
cocktail is there.
yes, the cocktail is there. So everybody will be able to figure out their own cocktail and how that, well, or at least what we're getting at when we do that. So key exercises for stability and movement. So we will see you all back next week, and feel free to invite anyone to come with you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kristine.
You bet.